Okay, let's talk about the escalating trade war between the US and the rest of the world, and particularly China. Now, before I start, I apologise for my voice. I've had a bit of a cold. My voice is not up to what it usually is. However, let's continue. So there's been such a lot going on. It's kind of difficult to keep up with. So first of all, when China responded to the US tariffs, imposing 34% tariffs on American goods coming into China, Trump kind of responded again to that by adding another 50% tariffs, taking up to 104. And then, due to China not capitulating to the US, he's now announced tariffs of 125% on all Chinese goods entering the US market. But there's something more happened to that. During this time, the yields on American 10 and 30-year USTs started to increase quite rapidly. So the 10-year bond went up to about 4.5% and the 30-year bond hit 5%. Now this is a big problem for the US, because this year alone, they have to refinance about $9 trillion. And by those yields increasing, they will have to pay much more interest when they roll over that debt. But yesterday, there was a large sale of USTs into the market, around $50 billion, what I believe. And many people on X and economists speculated that it was China selling these USTs to prop up the yuan. But as time went on, it turned out that it was Japan who actually sold down these USTs. And it's quite interesting, because two of the world's largest buyers of USTs are Japan and China. And it looks like, well, certainly China won't be buying anymore. They're reducing their holdings of USTs. And I think one of the reasons they're doing that is because they saw what the US did to Russia, seizing its assets. And I think China don't want to be in that position where the US tries to seize its assets. So they are reducing their holdings of UST. And this Japan selling off $50 billion of USTs also suggests that Japan are not going to be a big buyer of US Treasury bonds going forward. So I'm really not sure who is going to be buying these Treasury bonds in the future. Maybe the Fed will have to buy them up. I don't know enough about the bond market to comment on that, but it's just my observation that China, and it looks like Japan, won't be buying up a huge amount. As I say, they have about 9 trillion to refinance this year, which is a heck of a lot. But anyway, due to these spikes in the yields on bonds, Trump has had to capitulate or walk back his tariff policy, and he's now reduced all countries around the world to 10%, apart from China, which stays at 125%. And that really signals that the main country they want to attack here is China. Trump says that up to 75 countries have contacted his administration wanting to do deals. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. And we do know that Vietnam have contacted the US administration, suggesting that they have a 0-0 tariffs. But the US have rejected this. They are of the thought that if they buy, 10 billion of goods from Vietnam, then Vietnam should buy 10 billion of goods from the US. Well, it's just ridiculous, because you have the US, which is a much richer country than Vietnam. Vietnam manufactures a lot of items for the US at lower cost than the US can manufacture. So to think that Vietnam can buy a similar amount of goods from the US as the US buys from Vietnam is just simply ridiculous. And that goes for a lot of countries around the world. They're much poorer than America. They won't be able to buy those amounts of goods from those countries as that the US buys from them. So it's a bit of a silly thing for the US to be going down this line. Anyway, I think as far as China are concerned, I think Trump has suggested that he's waiting for a phone call from Xi Jinping, and I don't think that's going to happen. Over the last 8 years, China have prepared for this eventuality. China are in a very, very strong position. Funny that Trump thinks he holds all the cards, but in my opinion, he doesn't. China hold far more cards. I think the US are far more dependent on China than they're trying to convince the public. There was a story in one of the American newspapers today talking of a toy importer in the US that sells toys for special needs kids. And previously they were paying a tariff of $26,000. Under the new tariffs, they would have to pay a tariff of $346,000. It's just crazy. And there are going to be many, many companies in the US in that situation. As I said before, a lot of what the US buys from China is just not available elsewhere at this point in time. However, a lot of what China buys from America can be easily switched to other countries. So China can buy from other countries, like mainly agriculture and energy, which they could easily get from Russia. And in fact, last year, the trade with Russia increased by about $50 billion. And, it continues to increase. Russia has the ability to supply a lot more goods to China. And another thing to think about with Trump and his tariffs backwards and forwards. 1 minute it's 50%, the next minute it's 10%, then it's 125%. This trade policy is changing almost daily, and that's really not good for business and industry. Business and industry need stable economies to operate in. And it's kind of funny that Trump thinks it's China that are disrespecting the world markets and economy. Well, in fact, it's the US, and by doing this, the US are just slashing their credibility with the rest of the world. Do you really think that many countries around the world will want to form a closer relationship with the US, or do you think they'll want to form a closer relationship to China, whose trade policies are very, very stable compared to the US's, whose trade policies are literally all over the place, changing on a daily basis? I think what Trump has done with these tariffs, even if he does walk them all back, I think he's actually damaged very much the reputation of the USA. And I think, countries won't be rushing to do more trade with the USA. They'll actually be trying to deleverage their trade from the US in case things change again in the future. Like these 10% tariffs are apparently now only for 90 days while more negotiations are done. But the reality is, Trump panicked in the face of the yields on the bonds rising, and he walked back his tariff strategy. And it's really kind of funny because you've had Besant, I think the Treasury Secretary, now sort of make a statement. Actually, here it is.
This was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along. And that, you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors. And we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate, things will turn out well.
And Besant is trying to say that this was all the plan. This was exactly the plan to draw China into a trap. I don't think anybody for 1 minute believes that. They're just trying to cover now and cope with the failing tariff strategy. I really think that if Trump thinks he's going to get China to back down, or he's going to get a call from Xi to negotiate, he's very, very mistaken. We've just had a statement from Mao Ning, which is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she has posted, "We are Chinese. We are not afraid of provocations. We don't back down." So I think Trump will be waiting a very long time for that call. Anyway, that's my opinions. I'll be very interested to know what you think. So please leave a comment down below. But as always, for now, take care.